asking a couple of those while I speak. So please don't be
Fantastic.
shy again.
So it's 5:30 and we love to get started on time. So first of all, a very good evening and a very, very warm welcome. Today we have an interesting masterclass on women empowerment and writing with the best-selling author and editor Rupangi Sharma. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Sukirti Gupta. I'm one of the co-founders of Sipping Thoughts. Sipping Thoughts is a multi-platform media company that we set up keeping in mind the tagline, Real Women, Real Thoughts. We are a no judgment platform and want to create a network of women for women and, of course, the men that have supported us. Sipping Thoughts reaches to about 2.5 million women on a monthly basis, and we're quite excited about that. You can check us out on Facebook. We're available on Instagram. We're definitely there on our website. You'll find lots of interesting content for you to consume. But today, we're going to be talking about the voice, and specifically your voice, and how it can be the key to women's empowerment. So, here we have a session that hopefully will inspire you to start putting your pen to paper and transform these societal ills into a flame of light that will light the path for women like you and me everywhere. It will also help us to fully unleash our inner power and really create a roar. So, we all think that we can write, but what really makes for a great writer and a strong female character in fiction? And how to write these stories that empower and inspire women and also men? This masterclass is really focusing on those writing tips and tricks that will help you across many, many genres. A little bit about my guest today. I mean, I think a lot of you know her. She is Rupangi Sharma. She's an author, she's an editor, she's an edupreneur. Her best-selling debut novel, A Life of My Own, is about gender-based sex selection. She's the founder and CEO of EFG Learning, which means Education for Growth, which is a Mumbai-based education consultancy. She has co-edited India Alive, which is a compelling volume featuring discussions among South Asia's most influential thinkers. Her nonfiction contribution was also published in the best-selling Chicken Soup for the Soul series. She also has done poetry, and the name of her book is A Loving Embrace, which was released by the Delhi Chief Minister, the late Sheila Dikshit. So she wears many, many hats. So I'm dying to understand how she does all of this. She has been invited to speak at the Tata Lit Fest, the Mumbai Lit Fest, She the People, Women's Writer Fest, the Think Literature Fest, the Think Woman, and which is a Power Fest. She has a lot of books that are upcoming with HarperCollins and with Penguin. So first of all, Rupangi, welcome to Sipping Thoughts. So excited to have you here.
So excited to be here, Sukirti. What a path breaking platform you have. And I love the fact that it's no judgment and it's supported by men. I think those are two very critical things in our discussion about women's empowerment, especially.
So tell us a little bit about your debut novel, which was A Life of My Own, and what made you really write about social issues. And I think one of the big social ills about gender selection.
Absolutely. So here's my book. I just want to put it up and hold it up. A little bit of a marketing plug from my end. But so A Life of My Own is about Shweta and her struggle. And, she's at this very critical moment in her life where her husband and her in-laws, and unfortunately even her mother, are forcing her to really think about aborting her child only because the child happens to be a girl and still in the womb. And this is something which is so common, unfortunately. This is something that every time I talk about my book, a lot of people have come up to me and they've spoken to me about their own experiences or experiences within their family or their social circles, with their friends. And so it was so important for me to write this book, because I realized that it's just something that has become a part and parcel of Indian life as well as South Asian life, and something that we need to challenge.
And I know, I mean, I think if you've also, a lot of you have maybe since seen the short series that has also come out with Kajol on Netflix. This is also covering this issue because it's a major issue. And we think it only happens at certain levels of society. But what we are seeing is it's happening at all levels of society.
Absolutely, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah. You've also written a lot of short stories, you've done poetry, and now a novel. How are you able to transition between the different genres? And is it very difficult as a writer to move between different genres?
Actually, it's been very interesting to do so. So poetry is, it's pithy, it's rhythmic, it's a commentary on life through a particular moment, which is visual. It's a completely heightened sensory experience, right? Whereas with short stories, you're pulling in the reader from the get-go. You want them to be focused on a particular incident or a turning point, which is happening to a character or multiple characters in the story. Though it follows a similar structure to a novel in terms of the narrative, but it's a lot more concise, right? And so you have writers like Alice Munro, who I feel, I would recommend everybody who's listening in to really pick her books up and read them, especially because she really manages to hold your attention, pull you in, and make you engage with her characters within a short frame of time, because those are all short stories and she's a very well-known short story writer. So and with novels, I think because of the length, you really need to know your characters, you need to let them live on the page, you need to in that sense, it's really intense because you're playing God, right? You have a lot more flexibility because of the length, and it revolves around a central conflict or an existential theme or question which you're exploring in depth till the resolution and the aftermath of the entire question that you're exploring, or the conflict that you're exploring, through your protagonist. So I think that in that sense, novels are all about, it's a full length work, and it takes time, definitely a lot of discipline. And I'd love to go into that and the writing process. I will be doing that a little later in the talk. But I feel that in both short stories and in novels, everything should be character driven. And they tend to have a lot more impact if it's character driven.
Fantastic. Now tell us, I mean, you've also been the editor of India Alive, which actually has a lot of influential thinkers. Tell us a little bit about that and your journey as an editor also.
Sure. So India Alive is actually a set of discussions around the public discourse in India. And that's why aptly titled India Coming Alive, right? India Alive. And you have leading intellectuals from Southeast Asia, like Sunil Khilnani, Shyam Benegal, a lot of others who are talking about essentially, kind of post-independence, pre-independence, the quality of public discourse and how it is shaped, or the institutions have shaped that public discourse, and what it looks like today in terms of even media houses and the kind of narratives that you're seeing on the screen. So I think it made me think very deeply about how we have a youthful population, but we are also one of the oldest civilizations, right? And the older we get as a civilization, the greater the need there is to bridge memories and identities to form a kind of foundational idea of what it means to be Indian, and inculcate a sense of belonging and pride, which is based on inclusive public dialogue and politics. And I think we see a lot of that happening now, a lot of questions around that, cropping up a lot. In the book, you have Nentara Segal, who's asking us to understand how can we create an idea of India that will appeal to the youth. You have Sunil Khilnani, who's wondering whether online media reinforces the same ideas rather than actually facilitating new ideas and conversation. There's Amita Baviskar, who's reminding us of Gandhi's embodied politics and how thoughts now need to be translated into action. And I think that's something, again, all of these are really important discussions to be had. And there's also a very interesting, which I personally, given that I also have a background as a media student, you have Shyam Benegal, who asks about how is it that we don't see much of rural India in our films anymore. And that's something, again, a backdrop of which we are seeing in reality right now with the farmers' crisis going on. So, consumerism in a way is fueling today's narratives on screen as well. And these are all critical questions that we need to be asking as Indians to understand how it is that the quality of public discourse today has become so unimaginative, uninspired, unsubstantial, and driven by hidden agendas. So I think, what are the real issues and questions which we should be discussing? And that's what the book is about as well.
And I think that's what this session is also about, because it's aptly titled Women, Empowerment and Writing. So I think that comes to my last question before I hand it over to you. So, how can writing really empower women?
Sure. So, Sukirti, I really feel that empowerment is something very simple yet so complex, in the sense that it's really about having the agency to choose, right? And finding the inner strength and voice to stand up for your beliefs. And I realized that exploring gender bias sex selection, led me to think about the lack of respect that we have for women in our society, our collective apathy towards women's voices, experiences, their pain, their grief, their happiness. I mean, there are so many things that we are told about growing up as girls, or even as boys, really. Social conditioning, which we absolutely have to challenge now if we have to thrive and live a happy life. And if the narratives that we are creating as creators, as media houses, can give that space to women, I think I really believe it will become part of our subconscious to challenge those biases and find solutions to bridge those gaps.
So fantastic. Thank you for that. And now I will turn it over to you and let's get started.
Absolutely. So I'm quite excited. I just want to spend a moment welcoming everybody again. Thank you for joining in. And I will throw in a couple of questions so it's a little bit more interactive. And towards the end, of course, we'll throw it open for Q&A. So I just want to start with, just a little bit about the art of storytelling and also my journey as a writer and the process of writing itself. So when I'm writing, I become one with the character in mind and in heart, you know, and you have to be able to completely shut your own thoughts out and bring your characters in. I think a lot of people think it's about that the characters are about the writer or the author, but it's really not that way. The magic happens when you're sitting and writing and you're in such a state of flow that you lose count of the number of hours that you've spent writing, and it's so meditative in that sense. And then your characters kind of come alive and start doing things on the page themselves. So that's them living, that's them bringing their voice, and that's why you really need to get to have an authentic story, an authentic novel, or any type of creative work and art piece. And so, like Sukirti was mentioning, I started my writing journey with poetry. And I don't think there was any particular reason as to why I started writing poetry. I suppose when we are young, we have a natural affinity for rhyme and rhythm. And, instinctively, I knew that while a poem is about rhyme and rhythm, it is also about an image and a message which scratches beneath the surface of our daily existence, while using the same mundanity as inspiration. So you're looking at mundane moments in your daily life, and somehow you find yourself being very inspired and moved. And those are things which can really take your narrative, your poetry, whatever you're writing, to the next level. So you need to squeeze the moments of your life, of every emotion, if you want to feel that inspiration. And you have to live in the moment. You have to let yourself feel and allow yourself to ask the questions that address your existential anxiety. Right. So I'm going to quickly ask a question to you. What makes a story memorable for all of you? So for me, it's when I get very attached to a character and I'm immersed in the character's world. What about all of you? And I'd love to have a quick look at the chat and see if there are a couple of comments coming in. I see a couple of questions. I think we can take those
Yes.
in the Q&A. But I'd love to hear from you about what makes a story. And okay, Kirtna, thank you for that. When there is an emotional transformation. Sushmita says value in life. Payal says when I can relate to it. Absolutely. I feel the same way, all these responses. Parveen, thank you so much for that. Challenges. I think that's so important. Nisha, it is again, relatable. I think that's so important. Shagnik says if the beginning and ending are superb. That's absolutely great, Shagnik. That's so true as well. Rama, thanks for that. Relatable. Annie says you feel a part of the plot with the details and the picturization. Absolutely, I think that's a very important point, that it needs to be visual. Amrita, thank you for that. Inspiring. That's something that I love bringing to my work as well. Sujata says relevance to life. I think that's something that we all feel. We're all looking to these narratives to kind of bring that to our life as well, something that we can learn. Mahima says, when the character is not black or white, something I'm going to talk about a little later. All right, so I'll give all
One
of
more
you
thing
a
I also
moment.
put down,
Yeah.
when there is a
Yes,
twist,
Sukirti.
an unexpected
Yes.
twist. That's what makes it memorable for me. When there is
Lovely.
something that I did not
Lovely.
expect to happen.
Absolutely lovely. Thanks so much for that, Sukirti. Great. So, a quick note on the science of storytelling. Why do we really tell stories? Because I think it's so important to also remember that when you're writing, that stories are told to capture attention, right? That's the main aim. Like Sukirti just said, it's that twist that keeps you holding on to the edge of your seat. You've got the book has got her attention. So that's what you're really doing. You're getting your readers' attention, and that's the main aim. So when I wrote my first few chapters and kind of gave it to my beta readers, gave it to people to read, the most important feedback that I got was that I want to know what happens next. I think that's what you're looking for. Have you got your readers hooked? The questions that my readers were asking of me was, does Shweta get out of this situation? And if you're getting the same feedback, essentially you're on the right track. So you want to be looking for that question, really, that what's happening next? What's going to happen? Right? And you want to be pulling your listener in so much that if I take a pause, they're unable to stop themselves from kind of leaning forward in anticipation for what you have to say next, right? So let's get on to how do you get started as a writer? So a couple of things, just as notes to ourselves and notes to keep in mind, to make this process something which is a part of your daily life, so that when you get to writing, it's a lot more easier and it's a lot more in a state of flow, like I mentioned earlier. So this is something which is very common among all writers. I wonder if you've also gone through it. I'd love to have a yes or a no if you have gone through it. I often thought of myself as a character. And this is something that a lot of writers and authors talk about. It's a common experience that, you are sometimes in your mind thinking of yourself in that whatever situation that you're in right now. And you're thinking, she is giving a talk. For example, I'm giving a talk right now. And I'm thinking in third person about myself. And why this is interesting and important as an exercise is that if you observe yourself as a character, over a period of time, you're going to be able to bring another character onto the page and come alive really easily. So you have to observe yourself as a witness. You observe your own motivations, your desires and inner conflicts, and kind of look around you to see, to note all of these things among your friends, your family. I think that will give you a flavor of what characters look like, because this is what you're really going to be addressing. These are, the brass tacks of writing your characters. What are their emotions, their motivations, their desires, their inner conflicts, right? And so this is something that mimics life. So use your inner life and others' inner lives, if you have access to it, as a narrative that you can bring in later in some way, shape, or form. It may not be exactly the same, but it becomes like a fabric that you can use to weave your story. So for me, just talking about Shweta, I thought about her struggle and how she's faced with this very harsh choice. And I wanted to portray the inner life of family, the mother-daughter relationship, women supporting each other, which I think is really important to see in narratives, and the conversation and relationship between God and the unborn child, which was a lot more complex to actually weave in. But these were all elements which came to me, in a moment of inspiration, and from there on, I just kind of did a lot of exercises to get used to writing characters and bringing them to life, and what makes a story interesting. I think those are the two essential questions. The other is, do you really want to tell this story? And I think this is really important for you to ask of yourself, because you sit with this thought, and have to be honest with yourself. You will be spending a lot of time actually writing and engaging with these characters. So you have to absolutely be convinced that this is something I want to write. for me, everything I've written, I wanted to write very badly. So it's definitely, I had no choice to kind of do anything but to put it to writing. So in a way, you want to be in that situation yourself, because it makes it, you know, so much easier. It's so hard to write. I need to underscore that, because people don't realize that when you start writing, you do. So it's important to know that before you start writing. For those who do write, I'm sure that you already know this, but you have to feel a pull and a commitment to the story that you're telling. So that's really important, right? And if you don't feel that inspiration deeply, like kind of a calling, your prose will be very dull and uninspired. So
Hear
on the
some more
best of
about these.
days, yeah.
Yeah, Rupangi, one question though before we move on. I want to hear about some of these exercises that you have said, because I think this is the stuff that we all struggle with.
Absolutely. So one was, thinking of yourself as a character, and the other is, writing a brief character outline. And how that helps is that once you have done some of that, I noticed, for example, the characters had started living in my head, and that when I'd go for a walk, or when I was doing something else, any other kind of activity, I'd have all these characters, maybe in a drawing room, and they're sitting and talking to each other. That's another exercise that you can do. Bring in all your protagonists and your characters, even if they're not central, to sit in a living room and have them talk to each other. And what this does is it gives you an idea of, who your characters are. Without that, there is no story. You need to understand your characters very deeply. So yeah, so that's another way to do it. And I think one thing that, what is the difference between a short story, a poem, and a novel? It's in the sheer number of words that you have to be able to write. So you really want to be able to inculcate a discipline of writing. And one exercise that really helped me in the beginning was, I'd wake up in the morning and I would write anything. So if it was my dream, I had a dream, a very vivid one, and I'm one of those few who can remember vivid dreams. I sometimes, even last night, I mean, I woke up in the morning thinking about my dream. And if you can, that's great for fodder for you to kind of bring in and just wake up into your diary. You pick up your diary and you start writing about what was the dream that I had. Otherwise, it can be anything. Just literally, when you wake up, you keep a journal next to your bedside, and you will pick it up in the morning and just start jotting down anything that comes to you. You can look around for inspiration if it's not in your head yet. If you're yawning, you can write about how lazy you're feeling. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. This is not about writing well. This is about oiling yourself up, so that when you do get to writing, you don't face any kind of there are no breaks to it. Once you get that machine well oiled, then it's going to be, you yourself will be taken aback by how fast it all comes to you in a moment of inspiration. So that's something that I would definitely recommend, that just wake up in the morning and do that. And then another is, of course, to have a writing schedule, because that's what you're building towards, right? Obviously, I mean, this is a logical conclusion to it. You're waking up in the morning, you're writing, you're doing that, but then also setting aside a couple of hours or whatever that looks like. And don't be worried about another thing, which I see in the beginning, is that a lot of people are worried about word counts, and they're worried about, how good the writing is, etc. None of that matters. What matters is you need to write. That's it. If you cannot write, it can be terrible writing, it can be uninspired, it doesn't matter, because all of it will be fixed later. So that's something that's very important. A lot of people have this preconceived notion that, writers, we just wake up and we have everything and it's all good to go and it's ready-made material. No, that's not how it works. You wake up, you do the work, you have to write first, and then a lot of the work is done in editing, which I'll come to later. So yeah, so you have to commit to a writing schedule, and that has to be sacred to you. You cannot allow anybody to disturb you. No time for friends, family. Everybody needs to be told this is sacred time, and you're completely hands off. Right, and that's one of the dilemmas of writing. How do you get that space and time? Well, that's for you to figure out, and that's part of, how it is, how you have to commit as a writer to your writing. So for me, I started writing this novel when I was 19, right? So I was really young. So life interrupted a lot of times, but I still found a way to work around it. So I was a student first. I'd write during college sometimes or in between breaks. My first job, I was writing in my break time again, during lunch. During my master's, again, I was writing, even though I was, submitting a lot of research work, thesis, blah, blah, doesn't matter. Never stop me from writing. So that's what you really need to do. You find the time to do it, and then that's where the magic happens, right? So keep finding ways to, what are the things I need to do for my writing. So for example, for me, a lot of research went into this. So I had to make sure that I was attending workshops around gender bias, sex selection. I was talking to people about their experiences, or accessing, either first-hand experiences or second-hand experiences. So you have to find a way to get the resources you need and make sure you access those frequently, and make a schedule for that as well. So you're kind of complementing. There are two things going on. One is your writing, and then everything around it, which is helping you to research and work all of this out as a narrative. Okay, so that so that's about how to get started. Another thing I'd just like to talk about, and Sukirti, I'm sure you're aware of this as well. I mean, unfortunately, in the media world or any kind of where you're doing creating, there's a lot of rejection. So that's inbuilt, and you have to find a mechanism to beat that rejection and have faith in yourself. I'm taking a moment to talk about it because I think it's so important to have faith in your work, to really work on it, to have that discipline to better your work, to be honest with yourself. So these are all things I think which are anyone in any field looking at achieving excellence will do the same things. These are all principles and ethics of working, and you bring that into your writing as well. So definitely look at writing as work. I think when you take yourself seriously and you take your work seriously as a writer, it will be something that you'll end up achieving. So yeah, so get used to rejection, send your work out often. And on this note, I think I just want to take a moment, because this was something Sukirti and I were discussing as well earlier, that, chicken soup. So one was in 2011, when I was still in my teens. I got this opportunity to connect with the editor of Chicken Soup for the Soul series, but they were doing it in India. So an Indian edition. And just a little quick brief on what Chicken Soup for the Soul is. These are all, it's a compilation of people who have given in their real life stories. So kind of like what you see in a Reader's Digest, but drama in real life. And so that's what the theme of the series is, and it's a best-selling series across the world. And so it was quite the privilege to be able to be published by Westland in that series. And I think that's again, addressing my point about sending things out without the fear of rejection, because that's what I was doing as a teenager. I just logged on to the internet and I would just get in touch with, there are all these forums. And I think now it's so much easier. At that time, I didn't have Facebook, for example.
Rupangi, I'll take a moment to stop you here, because
sure.
Vijay is asking this question, and I think a lot of us are confused. Where do we send it? I mean, I know everybody tells us there's lots of resources. Where do we actually send our material? Do we have to send it to publishers? Do we send it to contests? Where do we send the work that we are working on?
I think it's all of the above, right? You just have to, everything is available now online. I mean, I think you go on LinkedIn, you can get in touch with editors. I think editors are the people you want to be in touch with, right, Sukirti? Because they're the ones
they're very hard to get in touch with.
Oh, absolutely. But that's kind of that's kind of inherent, isn't it? I mean, these are, if it was easy to write.
I come back to Rupangi's point. I have sent mine and I've been rejected many times. So I'm still looking for that.
Absolutely. No, but so here's the thing. That's also another reason why I write across genres. If you can develop that ability to write across, I think it's just a matter of probability, right? If you're sending out 100 submissions, you're going to get there at some point. So I think it definitely has to be quality, of course. So I'm not saying that, you value quantity over quality, but at the same time, if you can increase your repertoire, in terms of the genres that you're writing in, and you can really work on across genres. And that's why I think it was important for me to have a discussion across genres, because this is what makes it easier to get published. If you can write nonfiction, if you can write fiction, if you can write poetry, you're going to hit the mark at some point. The world isn't that hard. The world is not that tough to crack. It's not that hard at all. You have to believe in yourself first, and then just keep honing your work, and look at your repertoire. Look at how much of work can I contribute. I think when you see value in what you have to offer, you're able to more convincingly talk about it to editors as well. I think therein lies the difference, because a lot of times we don't have the faith, and we don't know for sure that we're good at something. It's very difficult to actually get your work out there. And I see another question has popped up. You two are editors. So, Kirti, this one's for you.
I'm not
Can
an
we send
editor.
it to you?
I wish I was. I myself am trying to get a book published. So I'm learning as much as you are.
Right. So here's another quick tip, is to have a literary agent, and I'm sure Sukirti, you're aware of this as well. So what is it? Who forms the publishing industry? One is editors who are working at all of these various. If you're looking at fiction, then it's at HarperCollins, Penguin, all these top publishers, right? So you have the editors, and then within that, the editors have categories. So you'll have different editors for fiction, different for non-fiction, different for business. Within non-fiction, there are various categories. So you need to familiarize yourself with all the genres and all the categories, and then the editors for those categories. And then, find yourself, either you find a way to pitch it to all these people. And the way to do that is to have a good synopsis and to have a good chapter outline of your work. So all of this brings me back to doing your writing. If you're not getting the writing done, you're not going to be able to get to this stage, right? So I'm going to go back to talking about writing for a bit, and tips and tricks around that. And then again, towards the end, I think we'll get to, the business of writing. And so, Kirti, I'd love to, I think this is always the question that is on everyone's mind. How do you get a HarperCollins or a Penguin or any of these publishers to really look at your work? And so I will definitely address that in further detail. So yeah, I'm going to go back to story and plot, and then talk a little bit about structuring your novel, and these two. And so I'll go from there and talk a little bit more about the rest of the stuff that entails writing a book, which is a lot. So with story and plot, we have a classic quote from E.M. Forster, and he talks about the king died and then the queen died is a story. The king died and then the queen died of grief is a plot. So you want to be, when you're thinking about a plot, you want to be thinking about your conflict, because conflict is the key to everything. And if you love drama, then I think you're in the right profession, because it's all about conflict. I think my husband is now, whenever we watch a series or when we're watching or reading a book, I'm always on the lookout for what is the central conflict, because that's what really is exciting. And so I think now my husband's also gotten used to that conversation. He's like, oh, look, there's the conflict, kind of. But that's really the building block of what a story is all about, conflict. So you're moving everything around that.
Do you know the conflict before you start writing the story, or how does it happen? When you say the
Absolutely. So that's a great question, Sukirti. That's a great question. So you need to have an idea of the conflict before you start. However, I think the characters are the ones who drive the conflict, right? So it's only when you actually start writing that you see the conflict shape up. But you have to have an idea of the conflict. So for me, it was as simple as Shweta does not want to abort her girl child. She knows that she's giving birth to a girl child. However, everybody around her immediate environment are opposing her. So how does she get out of this? That's the conflict. That's, really simple. But obviously, when you're writing it out, it's completely different and a lot more complex. So what it entails is knowing, your characters, like I mentioned earlier, and then knowing your conflict. And coming back to what makes for a plot, it is all about exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and then the denouement, right? So this is something that I had mentioned earlier, and just quick tips which I found very interesting from Kurt Vonnegut, who's one of the most well-known American authors, is give the reader at least one character he or she can root for. Every character should want something, even if it is only a glass of water. And why that's important is because it makes the character human. So motivations and desires are important because they're interesting, but also that's what makes the characters come alive and look real and human. Okay, so every sentence must do one of two things: reveal character or advance the action. And I think this is true of dialogue as well. So you want to know your characters that well, so that even when they're talking, I think that that exercise about, having everybody in a living room and talking to each other is really good and works, because then you know how they'll react in a particular situation, or you know your character as well, so that when they're actually talking to each other, you're able to give an authentic voice to it. And obviously the voice can't be the same. Again, an amateur thing that we do is that in dialogue, you have multiple characters. They can't all speak the same way, or they can't all sound the same. There is a certain cadence to the way that they're talking. So things like that are things that, when you're thinking about dialogue and revealing character through dialogue, these are important as well. So every sentence must do one of these two things: reveal character and advance the action. The last one is really funny: be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters, make awful things happen to them. This actually worked really well for me, because I'm very sensitive. Okay, so I get really, when I looked at my characters going through these things, there was an impulse to kind of make things easy for them, but I realized that that's not how a story works, right? So I had to make things tough for Shweta. I had to make her struggle, and somehow actually I felt closer to her when I saw her struggle, and actually go and face all these struggles and then come out victorious. So it definitely is something that you will enjoy. It's difficult in the beginning, because obviously these are flesh and blood for you in your mind. So it's hard, but that's something you have to do and must do. Okay.
So one question
Finally,
that's
however,
come up,
yeah,
1 second, yeah, one
yes,
question that's come
yes.
up from Muja, because the plot should be authentic or should it not be
Hmm?
authentic? Because how did Sweta find out the gender of the fetus? I know that we are revealing a lot because gender test is illegal.
Yes. Absolutely.
How
No, so
authentic is
Nija,
the
what's
plot?
interesting is, yeah, so Kriti, I think that's a really important question. Thank you for bringing that up. Also speaks to gender bias sex selection, and the reality on the ground is that even though it's illegal, I think a lot of us may know this, but we won't tell or discuss about it because it's illegal. And that's also a reason why I wrote this story. But doctors actually, there are a lot of criminal cases or cases against doctors who very openly reveal the gender, or there are illegal, practices which don't follow very, which are not um, medically recognized, but they're there. They're just shops which have which are there all over, which people in the know will know about, which do all of these things. They're illegal. But there are doctors who have found a workaround through it, in that they say that, and you should read the book as well to know about this. But, they'll say things like, take some barfi and celebrate. So barfi actually means girls, or, like peda will mean boys. So there are all kinds of things which then through my research I found out that even though all of this is illegal, there are workarounds that doctors have found, unfortunately. And that's why there's so much of a clampdown, especially in the medical community, right? Because they do profit out of these kinds of situations. They do charge very highly for conducting illegal practices, obviously, in their clinic. But there are all kinds of things like this which are happening, which we may or may not be aware of. And even if people around us know about it, they're not going to talk about it, which is really why I wrote this book as well. Because even if there are people in your social circles who have been through it, they won't be able to talk about it. And so it needs to have a book, or it needs to have several books, where you see women in these situations and how they get out of it.
The question now also comes: how authentic should the plot be?
Right. So when you're talking about authenticity, so Kirti, what exactly do you mean? Let me get a sense on,
See, I'm just repeating
authentic
Yuja's
in the
question
sense that
because
should
she
it
asked about,
mimic real life
yes,
or
that should it mimic real life? Should it
ah,
be believable?
okay. Okay. No, absolutely. I think it needs to be authentic. And so, that's where I did a lot of research. So, nothing which is mentioned in my book is not real. The only thing which I had to conjure up, obviously, was the God and the conversation between God, who is, by the way, genderless, and the unborn child. That was an important point for me to kind of, also clarify in the book. So you have God and the unborn child in a conversation, and then God is also a motif. So God is not just as we know God, but God is a motif as an inner voice. So I think I was trying to be, trying to be a little kind of playing around with how do I bring in multiple perspectives, and also bring in a perspective of an unborn child, and how that could be interesting, because I think I'm fascinated by magical realism and surrealism and all these, various kinds of schools of art and thought as to what you can achieve. And I think they really make for very interesting reading. So yeah, so absolutely you need to have a plot that is authentic. However, there is still always space to be creative and imaginative in the way that you're bringing in those conversations that perspective, right? The multiple perspectives that you want to bring about. And especially with a social issue like this, I think it's important to have multiple perspectives, because you really want to understand why is it that, for example, in the book, her mother, and that this is another something that you should read about, but her mother, Shweta's mother, actually did the same thing. And so you have a conversation which is intergenerational in that she has done it, but Shweta chooses not to. So how does that conflict also play out? And that's where the mother daughter relationship also comes alive, because these are choices which are completely different. But then what really motivated her mother to do it, and what really motivated Shweta not to do it? So all these kinds of things were taken from real case studies. So for example, for the mother, there was a case study around a woman who had gone through multiple abortions. And this is again, these are all real stories. So a lot of times women go through multiple abortions because the family is just that keen to have a son and will not, it's pathetic, and it's absolutely horrifying. But to put a woman's health at risk just to have a son is something that is again common practice, something we don't speak about, but again common practice. So why does this happen? Is it the mother who is at fault? Who is at fault? And this was another question which was central to my book. Who is at fault, and what is it that is motivating women to do this? In a way, because we all ask this question of ourselves, why do women commit crimes against each other? Don't we ask this very question very often? And so, Kirti, I'm sure you also have seen all the posts, and these are things that we're trying to address. Women supporting each other. And I think the whole point is that there is this whole patriarchy, there's this whole system of kind of the subjugation that we speak of is so systemic that women are motivated to actually do these things, because they're in some ways rewarded. So it's a system of reward and punishment if you look at patriarchy. And if you have a son, then you have more value. And so what are you actually doing to a woman, right? So I think these are all the things that the book tries to address, because these are really central in terms of the social issue of gender bias sex selection as well. Okay. All right. So I'll go back to talking about writing, the story, and the plot is where we were at. So Kirti, quickly just wanted to know that we're good on time as well.
Yeah, we are running a
So I
little
can,
bit behind.
I
It's
think,
6:30.
okay. Okay. 6:15. So I'm going to try and wrap it up in about 5-10 minutes. Is that
Yeah,
fine from my end? And then we
that's
can
great.
open
Yeah.
up for
There are a lot of
Q&A. Okay.
questions coming up also.
Yeah, I can see that. And I'm so happy. Thank you, all of you. Thank you so much for putting those questions forward, and we'll definitely get to those. Okay. So, structuring the novel, we were talking about conflict. And I think going back to conflict, the bottom line is that you have to know the central conflict of your story. That's what we were talking about, and how your characters are going to respond to it. That helps you structure your novel. So that's what it's really all about. And of course, you need to look at points of view. And all of these are things which are pretty basic, but again, things that we need to think about very methodically. So when you're looking at your point of view, also don't take it for granted that it has to be in first person or third person, limited. There are multiple narratives that you can put forward through a particular point of view. So you need to really look at what are the pros and cons of each point of view before you actually decide on which one suits your narrative best. So give all of these things a lot of thought before you move into it. And of course, a lot of it depends on how well you are able to carry through those points of view. It's very hard to sometimes do first person. There are some or third person limited also. It's difficult. So these are all things you want to figure out before you go into your writing and start writing your novel. Okay, talking about characters, I think the living room exercise was interesting. But also, I just want to give a quick, a quick note here about how we all think that things need to be autobiographical in some way, and they don't really need to be. And especially with social issues. I mean, this is not a social issue I have, gone through myself personally. However, I did a lot of research to really understand what my characters would go through. So a lot of it comes from research and discussions with other people who have gone through things. And what you want to do is you want to also have a journal. Again, journals are very critical to write down, snatches of conversation, which might be something that would work for your book. So I actually have at some points in my life, someone might have said something to me which I found very disturbing, and I thought it was something that might work, and I might have put that in, but in a different way, in a different context, right? So these are all things you want to be on a constant lookout for, and this again speaks to how you need to be observant. And you really need to be in that mindset where you're kind of a witness to everything around you. I think that really helps you deepen your prose and make it more complex. Okay, writing through roadblocks is something that Suketi, you were mentioning as well before we started the call. Really, how do we get into that inner critic and silencing the inner critic? So I think here's what you have to do. You just shut that voice up. That's it. It's as simple as that. You cannot do anything else while you're writing. Like I said, the writing doesn't have to be good. The writing never has to be good at first go. I think we all have that impression that we'll write it out the first time, it'll be perfect. No, it's never like that. So I think, again, just speaking to that and a little bit more about editing, because I think that's more important actually than we realize. That editing is really what makes your prose sing and come to life. Okay, so what you do with editing is that, how I did it at least, and what worked for me, is that I would write. So you have writing periods and you have periods where you're doing your research, but you also have a period where you do your editing. So these are all complementary, and these are all phases of writing and creating, which go together, right? So you're reading books which will help you, or you're reading research which will help you, books you're reading across genres to understand point of view, etc., like I mentioned. So all of those things are things which you're looking at in other narratives. What is it that makes the story work? So those are things which you're reading different books for and observing. Then you're doing your research, and then you're doing your writing. All of these can be at different points. They don't coincide. And then finally, once you're done with your daily writing, you put it aside. So what I find very helpful is to put your work aside. What we tend to do is we write something, let's say we quickly, type out like 1,000 words or 1,500 words or whatever it is. And then we immediately get to editing. And I think just take a breath, because that breath is important. Take a breath between writing and editing, and you'll see that it makes a world of a difference, because what you couldn't see earlier, you see, when you're in writing, it's a mental process, right? So when you're in your that writing mindset, it's a very different mindset than the editing mindset. So you take a pause and a breath, and you will realize that when you come back to your work, you're able to see it completely anew. You will see things in it and loopholes in it which you didn't see earlier. And so what you need to do is, if you want to really refine your work, and this is what everybody who's really well accomplished as a writer will tell you, that they have various different drafts of their manuscript. So my original manuscript is very different. And then I had about 60 drafts in between. I'm not kidding about this. So each time I've actually changed. It could be a particular chapter or a section. It could be, multiple chapters. It could be a particular situation I didn't like, which didn't work for me. I don't know. You have to. So while you're writing, you silence that inner critic. That's important, because you need to get the writing done. That's your main aim and purpose. Just write. But when you're editing, you take that breath and a pause in between. And when you come back to it, then you want to be as critical. However, in that, not a critical way that shuts you down, that makes you nervous, that makes you believe that you're not good enough. Not that way. That's not what I mean. So you want to have productive criticism, and you want to sift through that in your mind. There is productive criticism, which will tell you, this particular sentence isn't working, this character doesn't sound authentic, or, these things you want to take a note of. And literally, I mean, take a note of. So when you're rereading your chapters after you've written them, given that pause, you want to be making notes about, what's not working for you, and then go back again. So it's a pretty long process. It's not easy at
Drafts.
all, not just about writing. Yeah.
60 drafts you did.
Yeah, absolutely. I have all of them with me. So, I think it's probably more, because I've been writing over many years as well. So it's really been because of the kind of issues that I've looked at also in the book. I think I needed to take that pause and give myself space to make sure I was writing a good book on a topic like this. Yeah. Okay, so that's about the editing, and that's so important. A little bit about the research part. I think I mentioned some of it. If you're looking to write about social issues, I feel this is really important. And what we don't realize is that case studies, although uninspired and boring, and sometimes they're anonymous, are actually a gold mine. So you can look and lurk in non-profits and go and get all their books. That's what I did. One of the non-profits I closely associated myself with was Population First, and I would make sure that I'm there for their workshops and events, and I knew the founders, and was able to have those conversations about what are the current questions around this particular social issue, which are being tackled by the UN, which are being tackled by all these, because the social issues, there are a lot of people who are working towards trying to alleviate or make a difference here. So you want to understand from them, from the horse's mouth in a sense, what really needs to be addressed, right? And you need to be sensitive to that. So I think when you're thinking about writing about social issues, the research is really important. All right. And now finally, the business of being a writer. I think this is where we're all at. So just quickly, something to keep in mind if you want to commit yourself to writing is that it is a commitment of anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And so this is something that we don't talk about. The time period itself is quite staggered. There's a reason for it. One is you are writing the story, that takes time. You edit it, that takes time. You write a marketing plan after that. Once you're done with everything, you have your marketing plan. You've got various documents like that, your synopsis, your chapter outlines, which you need to keep ready for your pitch. Okay, so and then you're finding your agent and your publisher. So all of these are different processes which involve completely different sets of skills. So one is, of course, the part where you're shut off from the world. And then the second half is where you really need to be vocal about what you've written and be a champion for your work. And so the in-between part, right after writing and editing, going to publishers, lit agents, all of this requires for you to have that mentality of championing your work. And then it's not over yet, because once you have the publisher, it's a completely different set of decision making that's going on, because it's then the title, it's then about the cover, it's about a lot of things. Some of these are within your you may have some control over. Some of these things you may not. But these are definitely things you want to keep in mind, because covers and titles, for example, are things that really impact your sales. So you want to, at every moment, I think at every time process through from writing to publishing, there's a different mindset involved, right? And so it takes what, about 3 to 6 months just to get a publisher to say yes, and that's if you're lucky. And you have a publisher on the hook who is interested in reading the work. That itself is a whole art. One is to get a literary agent. The second, you could get a literary agent to pitch for you. That works really well. I have an agent as well, and I'm very thankful for him and his help. He's been a mentor to me, Sohail Mathur of the Book Bakers. And you can also find or reach out to him, or reach out to these literary agents who will then champion your work for you. They're very well known in their fields, and they know all the editors. So it's important to get in touch with them and see if you can get them to champion for you. It's the first stage, that is through the publishers, because it's much more likely that an editor will read work that comes from them, rather than you sending a cold email. Although that still happens in India, I think it's also changing quite rapidly, that now major publishers will not take work or will not look at work unless it's agented. So you need to know who are the agents and who are some of the good agents, and contact them, connect with them, and get your work represented by them. Also very important if you want to have a really long career in writing. Right? So they pitch for you, or you're pitching, and then you take 3 to 6 months to kind of get a yes or a no. That's how much time it takes. It's horrible. I think this is not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's something, definitely, I think for me also, initially when you do it, for the first time, it's something that does take a while to get used to. Because one is the rejections, and then second is even getting a yes is something that takes time. So you definitely want to be able to either have a day job to keep your sanity, or write another book in parallel, so that you're not constantly thinking about, have I gotten a reject, or has the publisher said yes or no. So you want to actually work on multiple books, so that you're feeling confident and you're in control. Okay, so then finally, once your manuscript is acquired, of course, I gave you a little bit of a sense on what are some important things that you need to think about. And you need to now start thinking about marketing and sales. So the minute the publisher takes your book on is when you already start thinking about marketing, even though, it'll still be going through editorial inputs, but you want to be able to look at your marketing plan 3 to 6 months and put it into action 3 to 6 months, sometimes even before your next book is out. Okay, so that these are all things that you want to keep in mind. And it definitely is a lot of hard work. And that's why I said right in the beginning, do you want to tell this story? Because if you want to tell this story,
Did we lose Rupangi or?
I think there's some network issue. Her screen
Yes.
is frozen. Yes.
Let's just give her a second. I know there are lots of questions, so we'd like to get to all of them.
It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Rupangi ma'am, you're on mute. Just one second.
Hi.
Hi, sorry we lost you for a bit, so maybe you can just repeat that.
Yeah, so I think I was saying towards the end that, because it takes so much time and it's so much of a time commitment, what I said right in the beginning is something that's really important. Do you want to tell this story? Because, it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to actually get your book out into the world and read and, praised even, but you really need to work hard at every step and be completely committed and show up each step of the way. And so that's how I ended it. I hope that this has been valuable for everybody, and I'd love to now take questions if we have time. So Kirti, are we
Yes,
good?
let's take a couple. I know Shagnik has been waiting. Go ahead. Please go ahead with your question, and then we'll take Ramas and then Payal and Mansi. Go ahead. Did you want to ask it?
Okay, so I think it's Shagnik right now. I can only
Yes.
see some. I think I lost some of the
Yes,
earlier.
I guess he's been asking or she, who has been your role model or inspiration for writing, being an editor and an entrepreneur? Who has been that role model for you?
So that's a great question, Shagni. Thanks for asking. I think this brings me to something I also wanted to talk about. So in my immediate family, actually, both my maternal and paternal side, there are high-ranking officials in the army, freedom fighters, politicians, spiritual thinkers, and leaders. So I think in some way I have been influenced. I've had that opportunity to have a ringside seat into what India's issues and social issues pre and post independence have looked like. And so I think I feel very close to anything which involves my country. And I read somewhere about how there's a privilege that we all have being a part of a developing country, that we can actually shape the narrative of what really is the future for your country. And I think that was something that I am really inspired by, and again something that inspired me to pick up a sensitive topic like gender bias sex selection, because I'd love to see that rooted out once and for all from our country and from across countries as well. But yeah, I've seen, my maternal grandmother was a widow, but she was also a builder and a publisher. And at a time when not many women were working, and she was also a part of, social service, and she built a home for elderly people. And so she's done a lot of those things till the end of her days. And seeing women like that who are complex within my own family, who are complex, I'm sure I've had, and also have a lot of flaws, really inspired me, because I didn't see any of them in books that I was reading. So in a way, I think I was writing a book that I wanted to read. And that's another thing, if you want to read a book, write it.
And the second question is, being an editor, an edupreneur, and a writer, which one is tougher?
Okay, that's a great question. I don't, it's tough is a thing which I don't really think about much. I love a challenge, and so all of these are challenging in their own ways. And I absolutely love, wearing multiple hats. So Kirti also asked me that question in the beginning about how do you wear these multiple hats? And I think, Sukirti, you do the same. So I should be asking you that. So I think we should go to Sukirti and ask her.
Good way to turn over
How
the
do you, yeah, how do you wear those multiple hats? In some ways, I find, and I'm sure you agree with me here, that, in some ways it complements each other, the roles that you take on if you have multiple roles. And I'm not sure why we always think that we need to have one particular career path. It's actually really fulfilling to have multiple career paths, which you can grow over a period of time. Obviously, it doesn't take a year or a two. Sometimes it can take a year or two, and you kind of skyrocket. But oftentimes, and more realistically, it takes many years. So yeah, so Kirti, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Well, I'll do a webinar on that one too.
Yeah, I think we need to have a webinar on that. Absolutely, I'd love to watch
So,
it.
Rama, we'll take your question next.
Uh, Hi, Rupangi. And firstly, many congratulations for selecting a wonderful topic and a sensitive topic. And the definition
Thanks
of
so much, Rama.
empowerment that you gave, and the women that you met, so many for your own study and for this particular book. Do you somewhere feel they are not empowered, that has come to such pressure? What actually, where did you feel ki, yeah, that needs to be written? And somewhere after hearing to you, felt that women are not so empowered. What is your take on that?
No, absolutely. I think that we're at a critical juncture in the sense that this is why we're having these dialogues, because I think women now do want to be empowered, and they always have. And I think that women are very empowered, and sometimes we're just not hearing the narratives though. There are a lot of people, and this is precisely why I wrote this book also. I mean, there are a lot of women who do take positive action and who do, are able to challenge all these biases and come out of these struggles victorious, like I said earlier, but you just don't hear about it. And so here's to media platforms like Sipping Thoughts, really, to bring those narratives out and to really have all of us listening in and learning from that as to how we can empower ourselves through other women and through learning, what they've done.
Another question from Mansi. I think this comes back to Mansi. Would you like to ask your question? Otherwise, I'll ask it on your behalf.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Mansi.
So I actually had two questions. One of which is, uh, where do you do your research with? Like, what is the process of your research? Because the topic that you've chosen, as you said, is a very sensitive topic, so people don't talk about it very openly. So how do you make women talk on it? Like, how do you come across people who have experienced it? And the other question is, how does one stick to a single conflict throughout their novel? It is very easy to like keep on jumping through various conflicts. So how do you like stick to one?
Okay, great question, Mansi. I think even the latter one was really interesting. The first one, I think I briefly mentioned that earlier as well. That you go to nonprofits. So for me, for example, it was Population First, and hearing from them in person, from the founders and from people who have been on the ground working on these issues, as well as then looking at all of their literature. Right, you can do a quick literature review. That's what it's called in research, really looking at all the case studies and having trying to understand what are the various perspectives of women who are going through these kinds of situations. So that's what you can do. I mean, it is difficult to get people to open up about this, but I've always seen that when I talk about this book, people have actually opened up, and especially mothers, or mothers who have just given birth, or even mothers who are reflect back and talk about how their mothers-in-law or grandmothers might have shamed them for having a daughter. So there were a lot of discussions around that, because I think it's not just about gender bias sex selection per se. I think the conflict is around, it's a larger question around, do we respect women and why don't we respect women, and what really are all these practices, and the patriarchy that we speak of, what are those things which are coming into play, and bringing women to succumb, or really rewarding them to take such decisions which are harsh, and which are decisions which they would not take. And I think it's important here to kind of underscore again that women in such situations don't want to take these steps. However, there just isn't any other option, and it's not a good thing, or it's not a done thing, I feel, to victim shame. So there are women who go through all of these things, but just because they're going through that, looking at them as disempowered or putting them in a particular box is also incorrect. There are a lot of complex feelings and emotions and situations at play here. So I think you really need to understand it at a very deep level, so that you're not falling into that victim kind of, portraying women as victims, and accurately portraying why they are in that situation and what got them there. The latter half of the question was about sticking to the conflict, right? And I think that's a very important question. I think you have conflicts at there are multiple protagonists, so there should be multiple conflicts from their perspectives as well, to keep it engaging. But you need to have just a central conflict which kind of ties everything together. It's not that you can't have multiple conflicts. You absolutely can, and you must. Otherwise, it'll be a very boring book. But you need to have one central conflict which will kind of tie everything up for you, and everything in your universe that you're creating, your characters, all the dialogue, the situations, in a sense, should move at some point towards addressing that central conflict. So it may not do that immediately. So, for example, I had Shweta's friend who was going through her own set of issues, but in some ways it was, in a very subtle way, mirroring the larger question around women and their role in society. So I think if you have just one central conflict, you can stick to that. Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry, we're out of time. So any
Yes.
closing thoughts, Rupangi, before we end for the night?
So yeah, thanks so much, Sukirti, for having me here. I think that was it was really great to interact with everybody. And as a parting thought, of course, please buy my book and get in touch with me on my website www.rupangisharma.com. I'd love to hear from all of you, and I'm working on 2 books right now. One is with Penguin, one is with HarperCollins. One is a children's book, which is a really inspiring read. Both are nonfiction, and the second one is a business book, which has a very humorous kind of tone. So I think you're going to enjoy both, and I'd hope that you will pick those books up as well once they release. And I'm really looking forward to reading all of your books as well. Especially Sukirti, I'm waiting for yours.
You'll be waiting quite a long time.
No, I'm sure I won't. Yes.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for joining us, and thank Rupangi for being with us. And as she said, please do reach out to us. To reach out to Sipping Thoughts, you can reach out to us at info@sippingthoughts.com. We check out all the emails over there. So thank you all, and we wish you all a very good night.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Sukirti. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye. Have a great evening and a great weekend.